Hi, welcome to Mikey's Video Game Madness. Today we're playing Super Star Wars on the Super Nintendo. Yeah, we haven't done a retro game in a long time. Well, we did Spy Hunter, so I guess the PS2 is technically considered retro now, which is really weird to me because I remember seeing the previews on TV, this brand new system that's coming out, and it had all these tech demos and it showed Metal Gear Solid 2. And there was a demo of the girl from Ridge Racer Type 4, which is my personal all-time favorite racing game, still to this day, even though it probably looks pretty primitive. That's my favorite. And then there was also a demo of the facial features from the guy from the first Final Fantasy movie, which, me being a fan of the Final Fantasy series, I actually own the movie, and I've seen the Final Fantasy VII movie, but I've never watched the first Final Fantasy movie, and part of the reason is it doesn't look like it has anything to do with Final Fantasy. It looks like a straight up sci-fi movie, and it does look kind of cool, but I just never invested the time, and I've had the movie for, man, it must be several years now, and I still haven't gotten to it. Eventually I will. It looks cool. Despite me hearing that it was bad and it barely has anything to do with the themes or anything to do with Final Fantasy, I'm curious. It must be called Final Fantasy for some reason. There's probably something vague. I heard there's a scene with somebody that has a chocobo, which, if you're not familiar with Final Fantasy, that's that big bird, ostrich-like yellow bird that people ride on in the games, if you ever saw the imagery. I think with the PlayStation Pro demos, they've been showing Final Fantasy 15 and people riding chocobos. Anyway, this is Super Star Wars. I'm gonna bitch out and of course play it on easy because I don't know how far that I'll get in it. I haven't played this game in an extremely long time, and it's not forgiven. It's an older game. I don't get sometimes, it's rare when I hear it, but I've heard a few comments about people thinking that games are too difficult nowadays. I'm like, oh man, how would they survive back then? I pretty much suck at this game playing it now. Back in the day, I actually got quite good at it, but when I first played it, I sucked at it now. But back then, games are really, really expensive. More so than they are now. And being a kid, I didn't have that much money, so when I got a game like, say, Super Star Wars, I would play it over and over and over again for hours upon hours until I got good. Unfortunately, I don't have the memory or the muscle memory of playing this. I imagine if I played this for a long time, I could get good. I wouldn't need to play it on easy. But there's like a lot of death traps and stuff in this game. It's a straight up action game. It takes a lot of liberty with the movies. Obviously, Tatooine wasn't this dangerous, at least the portions that I saw in the film. But those are Womp Rats, by the way. I don't think we ever saw a Womp Rat in the movies until the special editions, which this came out before the special editions. You only heard like Luke reference it when they were talking about the diameter of where the photon torpedoes need to go in the Death Star, and he's like, oh, it's like shooting Womp Rats back home. That's not more, what did they say, 2 meters? Of course, now in the newer movies, the metric system and their language and stuff like that is completely different. Like, that's one of the things they altered. Well, they started with it in the prequels, and then when they went on, it was either the DVDs or Blu-ray, like everything went, I forgot what they call the Star Wars language, but everything got reverted, which makes sense because, you know, it's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Why would they be using English? So it makes sense, and it was an appropriate change. But anyway, this is Super Star Wars. It plays a lot like Contra, except you have a life bar, so that's nice because this game would be pretty much impossible, I think, unless you were like some super game player. That's the the Scarlet Pit monster. Apparently he came out of the hole. If you're not familiar with Star Wars, that was the... Well, if you're not familiar with Star Wars, you're not going to get the reference, but that's the pit, if you happen to see Return of the Jedi, that everybody was trying not to fall in Return of the Jedi, but this is what it looks like externally, I guess, if it came out, which is pretty terrifying if you ask me. On normal, that thing's a lot harder. Basically, the difference between normal and hard is that when you get hit, you don't lose as much health, but this game still gets super hard on easy because that's just the way it was designed. So I wanted to show you a little bit of the game, so I played it on easy because since I'm relearning how to play it, like, I probably would have died 500 times at the pit monster, to be perfectly honest with you. But I never got to finish this game. Like, I couldn't beat the Death Star level. But it's really cool that what they did with the Mode 7 and stuff like that. I think levels like these look really cool. And as the series progressed with Super Empire Strikes Back and Super Return of the Jedi, they got better with the graphics in the Mode 7. Like, if you want to jump into a super Star Wars game, I highly recommend to actually start with Return of the Jedi. I think that's the most balanced one. It's by no means easy, but it's more balanced, if that makes sense. The graphics are a lot better, the sound's better, and it's more accessible. You have a more, like, even though you can pick multiple characters in this game, which unfortunately you won't be able to see because that would take way too long. You can pick between, and this one particular one, you can pick between Han, Chewie, and Luke. And then Empire Strikes Back, I think it's the same deal. It's Han, Chewie, or Luke. And then Return of the Jedi, it's Han, Chewie, Princess Leia, and then Wicket the Ewok. I think it's only Slave Leia, though. I might be wrong. I haven't played it in a while. I'll cover that eventually, too. But the first time I ever played this was, we were part of the Indian Guides, which is like a Native American form of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. There's Indian Guys, and then there's Indian Princesses, and my father took my sister to Camp Thunderbird, which is basically a campsite. It's not really camping, it's like cabins. It's like Camp Crystal Lake, except without Jason Voorhees, as far as I know. But yeah, so usually when one of us went on a camp out, like, got to rent a movie or something, and for whatever reason my mom treated me to let me rent a Super Nintendo. I had a Sega Genesis, and I liked it very much, but I was also curious about all the Super Nintendo exclusives, just like I am with exclusives on the Xbox today. There's a lot more exclusives back then for the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. There's more multi-platform ports now than there are exclusives. So I really wanted to play the new Donkey Kong Country game. Mega Man games, at least here in the US, didn't come out on the Sega Genesis, so I really wanted to play Mega Man 7. I really liked the colorful big sprites of that game, and I never got to play a 16-bit Mega Man 7. I don't even think I played Mega Man X back then, but I could be wrong. I eventually did. I was actually better at Mega Man X than I was 7, although Mega Man X gets harder later on, so that could be debated. Maybe I'm shitty at Mega Man 7 at first, and then it gets a little bit easier because Mega Man X gets pretty fucking hard later on. But I rented Mega Man 7, Donkey Kong Country 2, was it Diddy Kong's Quest or some shit like that. I can't remember what the little subtitle of it was called. I plan to cover all these games eventually. I think I might have covered Mega Man 7 on the Mega Man Anniversary Collection. And then I rented Super Star Wars. I liked Donkey Kong Country 2 the best out of those games, but I like Super Star Wars the second most. And the crazy part about it is, this was right before I got into Star Wars. Like, I really didn't get into Star Wars until they came out with the remastered VHS tapes. Don't confuse it with the special edition, but they remastered it, even though I'm sure it looked as good as the original VHS tapes, because when I was in middle school, on Fridays, sometimes we didn't have as much work to do, and the teacher had the original VHS versions of Star Wars, and I was used to watching the remastered ones over and over again. In my personal opinion, they looked just as good. I imagine that was more for the Laserdisc crowd, and they came out with the VHS versions as well. But anyway, I was really grateful. What really got me into Star Wars, and I know Star Wars is more than spaceships and shit like that, but what really actually got me interested in Star Wars were, they were starting to come out with these Micro Machine models, and they had like the little dirt and grime and stuff that you'd see on the movies, and that made me curious. I saw Star Wars a whole bunch when I was little. Like, my cousin was pretty much a huge fanatic of Star Wars. We were like little kids even before we knew how to read, and he would get his mom to come in the beginning of the movie and read the scrolling text to us. And he'd have like secondhand action figures because we were kind of too young. We were like right after we were at the age where it was probably right after they liquidated all of them, and then they came out with Star Wars action figures around the time of the remastered versions, which I'm guessing would be 96, 95. I can't remember the exact date. But they started coming out with the ships, and I was really fascinated by them because when I was a kid, I didn't pay attention. I didn't really like Star Wars or sci-fi movies, for that example. My favorite movie of all time was Ghostbusters, and that's what interested me. I was more interested in the paranormal and weird stuff like that. There's like some crappy movies I used to watch as a kid. I really liked another George Lucas produced film, like movies like Howard the Duck and stuff. I thought were great when I was a kid, so I don't know how good my taste is. I think Ghostbusters still holds up. Ironically, I don't think Howard Duck is actually the catastrophe that it used to be, and I really liked Indiana Jones, but I never really got into Star Wars. Just wasn't my thing. And then of course, I watched the Disney movies like any kid would. I'm trying to think what movies and stuff I was into as a kid. I really can't remember. There's like Twilight Zone the movie, and I don't know. I liked a lot of stupid comedies and stuff. I remember really enjoying the Naked Gun movies, even though they're ridiculous and stuff like that. I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies, but I would try to catch them on TV, and I would watch movies like Return of the Living Dead, but they were all edited. But I still love that movie to the day. A month or so ago, I got the Shout Factory release of Return of the Living Dead, which is amazing. It has stuff that's not in the DVD version. I had no idea how much stuff that they altered when that version came out. Like, the sound and stuff is different. There's a missing soundtrack, and there's a few missing soundtracks in the DVD version. I think there's one missing in the Blu-ray version because it has like a lot of punk rock and what would you call it, like psychobilly type of music and stuff like that. I believe that's the term. And yeah, they couldn't get the licensing for all that, but I absolutely love that movie. And like all the Monster Visions, I used to watch the black and white horror movies and stuff like that, and I was fascinated by the Child's Play movies. I don't know why. I guess I was always into mechanical things, and just Chucky as a doll in general like really fascinated me. It was never like scary to me, just fascinated. And I was always fascinated the fact that he would slowly turn into like this doll that would slowly turn into like a human. Sorry, I'm all over the place here. But yeah, so I didn't really gain interest into Star Wars until they started coming out with these toys, and I wouldn't buy them. I would just look at them all the time, you know? And my grandmother was a member of that Columbia House thing where you pick a bunch of movies like for a quarter or some shit. It's some scam thing. But she knew that I was starting to become interested in the Star Wars movies. I ended up buying my first Star Wars toy, which was actually it was like this miniature set on Dagobah, where you could like raise the X-wing, even though it like raised like, I don't even think it raised an inch, but it was supposed to be stuck in the mud, and it had like a little slider, and it had like a miniature Luke and Yoda, and that was like my first Star Wars toy. And that, for whatever reason, sparked my interest in Star Wars. And then my grandmother, who was awesome, ended up getting the remastered versions of Star Wars, and between that and the game, like, and then finally seeing the movie, the rest is history. I've been a fan. So I don't have this grand story of seeing Star Wars first in the theater. When they came out with the special editions, I saw all three of them in the theater. I saw all the special editions in the theater. I saw episode 7 in the theater, and I plan on seeing Rogue One in the theater. I actually saw the prequel. I think I saw the Clone Wars like 2 times. I think that's the only one I saw more than once. I didn't go to the theater that much, so going to see Star Wars in the theater was a pretty big deal. I never asked to go to the theater, and that was one of the things I always made sure that I wanted to go see, because after seeing it in the theater, like it wasn't ever the same as watching it on the TV. Like, because back then you didn't have like a 65-inch, 55-inch television, even 42. Like, I think we had a 20-inch TV, so watching Star Wars on a fuzzy VHS with like monorail sound or whatever is not the same as the surround sound and being in the theater and seeing other people get excited and stuff like that. So it was really cool. So these games just looked cool, and this kind of got me a little bit curious about Star Wars, and then seeing the toys sparked my interest, and then I ended up buying my first toy. And then my grandmother saw that I was interested in Star Wars, and then after that she got the remastered versions, and then I've been a fan ever since. So that's my Star Wars story. So I did see Star Wars when I was a little kid. I just didn't like it or care about it, or I don't think it was that I didn't like it. I was just indifferent about it. I remember my cousin having like all these vintage toys, man. He should have kept them. He even had like the old trading cards that came with gum or whatever. I don't think he had any of the gum left. I went to New York recently, and there was this candy shop, and I wish I would have bought some of them. They had like Ghostbusters 2 cards and all vintage series. They probably had Star Wars cards somewhere. And since it was a candy store, I guess because it came with gum originally, they had all these vintage cards. I wish I would have bought some of them. But I mean, I would have felt guilty about opening them up, but there was no way I wouldn't have. But anyway, he had all these vintage Star Wars stuff that my uncle gave him, because my mom's brother was born fairly late, so he was pretty young. So he was at the age that like Star Wars was at its peak of popularity and merchandising and stuff like that. And since I wasn't into Star Wars when I was a little kid, he gave all the stuff to my cousin. I was more into like Indiana Jones Ghostbusters and stuff like that, and whatever other animated feature, like G.I. Joes, and I guess briefly the Ninja Turtles and shit like that. I don't know. And I guess my favorite thing about Star Wars is just the technology, because that's what really got me interested. And one of the things that bummed me out about episode 1, because I was expecting the grimy spaceships, because you didn't really see that in other movies. I think Battlestar Galactica, the original one, and Buck Rogers and shit like that, I think that like kind of, I don't want to say stole, we'll nicely say borrow, had some of those grimy spaceships. But when you saw Star Trek, everything was polished. And I used to watch the syndicated episodes of Star Trek, the original series, and then Next Generation. But when I was a kid, I just watched whatever was on TV. We didn't have cable, and the reception was really lousy, so we only had a couple of channels we could watch. It was like that, PBS, or Jeopardy usually when I got home from school, so I'd watch Star Trek or whatever. And I don't remember much about it, like, as a kid, beside several episodes. And Dean from Escape from Gaming kindly donated his Star Wars DVDs, which I plan on watching and catching up on, and trade. Like, I got him the Outlander game that's kind of like Mad Max. It was originally supposed to be Mad Max. It was supposed to be a sequel to the NES Road Warrior game, but they couldn't get the licensing for it. It's actually a pretty good game. I don't know if I ever covered it. Maybe I'll cover it at some point. It's pretty fun. It's not like mind-blowing as far as like the best games in the system, but it's a pretty fun game. And if you like driving games and Mad Max, that just makes you like it more. But this is a fun action game, but it's clunky control-wise a little bit. And as you can see, it's easy to die. It's hard to judge your jump sometimes. He kind of jumps a little bit stiff, as you can see. He's just kind of all over the place a little bit. But once you play it for hours and hours, like back in the day, like, you just got used to playing these games and you get good at them. Like, I sucked at this game as hard as I'm sucking now, and I'm playing on easy. But after playing it for hours and hours, like, I rented the game. I liked it. I got pretty far on it because I played it over and over again in between Donkey Kong Country. Like, I think I stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that, because I knew I had to eventually bring the game back, so I wanted to play it as much as possible. But eventually I got a Super Nintendo and I got to play the game, and I borrowed it from a friend, and then he moved away, so I had it for a long time, and then something happened to it, and now we're playing this version. So yeah, you can actually get this version on the PlayStation Network, on, I think it's just PlayStation 4, and I think you can get it on the Xbox One, but don't quote me. But I know for a fact it's on PlayStation 4. But it's a good game. It's a good start to the Star Wars series, and also Indiana Jones and the Greatest Adventures, which is probably my personal favorite of these types of games, because they're made by the same people. The JVC LucasArts games, we'll call them. They're all similar. They run on the same engine. They actually use some of the same graphical assets, like in the background and stuff like that. Like in Indiana Jones, like in Nepal, it looks very much like the Hoth level. But that's it. It's a good game. I try it out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy this. I'll continue to do some retro stuff instead of some contemporary stuff, because I really want to start showing stuff that other people aren't showing. But thank you, and take care. Bye.
If you want to, like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.